Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are somewhere else. Not here, not now. Let the sounds around you fade. The hum of whatever device carries this voice to you. The distant sounds of the city or the house or the night outside your window. Let all of it soften and pull back. Because we are going somewhere else tonight. We are going a very long way back. It is the 24th of August in the year 79 AD. Though you do not call it that, you simply know it as a hot, late summer morning in the most beautiful place you have ever lived. You are in Pompeii. You have been awake for a little while already. The city wakes early. It always does. You live above your workshop on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the city's longest and most traveled street. And by the time the first pale light is coming through the high window above your sleeping space, you can already hear the sounds beginning below you. The groan of cartwheels on basalt paving stones, the distant shout of someone making a delivery, the slap of sandals on stone as the first early risers make their way to the fountains to collect water before the heat of the day turns the air thick and still. You lie there for a few minutes in the way you do every morning, listening to the city come to life around you. There is something about this particular quality of morning light, that soft gray that precedes the full arrival of the sun, that makes the world feel suspended, as if the day has not quite committed itself yet to whatever it intends to become. In a few hours, you will not remember this feeling. You will not remember lying still and listening. But right now, in this particular minute, the world is quiet, and you are simply a person in it. You get up, splash water on your face from the bowl beside your sleeping mat, pull on your tunic. The morning air still holds a trace of the night's coolness, and you are grateful for it. By midday, the heat will have settled over the city, like a hand pressed flat against the stones, and the streets will empty as people retreat into the shade of their atria and gardens to wait it out. But that is midday. Right now, there is work to do. If you are listening to this in the dark, in whatever corner of the modern world you occupy tonight, that is exactly why this exists, so that you can let go of your own day and drift into someone else's, someone whose world was as vivid and ordinary to them as yours is to you. Let the story carry you. You do not have to hold on to anything. Your workshop opens onto the street. It is a modest space by the standards of the city's wealthiest residents, but it is yours, and you have made it comfortable through years of careful attention. The counter runs along the front of the building, its surface inlaid with the large ceramic vessels you use to hold the day's preparations, the cooked grains, the chickpeas, the stewed vegetables that the people of this city expect to find ready and waiting throughout the day. You are not wealthy, but you are not poor either. You occupy that large middle band of Pompeian life, the people who do not appear in the historical record, because they were not spectacular in any direction. They simply lived, and they simply worked. And on most days, that was more than enough. You step outside to pull back the wooden shutters that close the front of your counter at night. The street is already beginning to fill. A man leads a mule loaded with amphorae past your door, the animal's hooves loud and certain on the paving stones. Two women from further up the street nod to you as they pass, carrying covered baskets. The bakery, 3 doors down, has been producing its particular warm smell for at least an hour already, and you can hear the sound of the millstones from here. The deep rhythmic grinding, that will continue until the last customer of the afternoon has been served. Across the street, the wall of the building opposite is covered in painted words. It has been covered in painted words for as long as you can remember. New ones appear regularly, painted over old ones, or squeezed into whatever space remains. Announcements for games at the amphitheater. Endorsements for political candidates whose elections happened months ago. Small declarations left by people passing through, a name, a joke, a complaint about someone. The city expresses itself on its walls the way a person expresses themselves in conversation. Constantly, sometimes thoughtfully, often not. The mountain is visible from where you stand. It always is, from almost anywhere in the city. It rises to the north, its broad shoulders covered in the dense green of vineyards and forest. Its summit lost this morning in a low haze that you barely register. You have looked at that mountain every day of your life. It is as familiar to you as the sound of your own voice, yet as ordinary as the feel of the basalt stones under your feet. You have never thought of it as anything other than what it is. A landscape, a backdrop, the source of the soil that makes everything here grow so abundantly, the dark volcanic earth that produces the wine and oil that move through your city and out into the world in endless streams of sealed amphorae. You have not yet noticed that the birds are quieter than usual this morning. The day opens its fullness to you gradually, the way a day always does. Your first customers arrive early, workers who want something before the heat sets in. You serve them from the warm vessels on your counter, taking their coins, exchanging the brief and comfortable pleasantries of people who have seen each other most mornings for years. The street fills and empties in rhythms you know by heart. The wealthy merchants heading to the forum for the morning's business. The women making their way to the covered market near the basilica. Children running between buildings on errands that seem enormously important to them. You have been meaning for some time to visit the new baths. They are building on the eastern side of the city. The central baths. Everyone says they will be remarkable when they are finished, with windows so high and so large that even the deepest interior rooms will be flooded with light. The construction has been going on since before the earthquake, which means it has been going on as long as most people can clearly remember. The earthquake was 17 years ago, and the city still carries its marks. Though you have to look carefully now to see them. And the oldest residents can point to walls where the new plaster stops and the original begins. They can tell you which temples are still being restored, which public buildings were never fully repaired. But to you, who were born in this city and have known nothing else, it all simply looks like Pompeii. The morning moves through its familiar passages. The heat builds as the sun rises higher, and the narrow canyon of the street begins to hold the warmth, the way stone always does. You have restocked your counter once already, and are thinking about when to eat something yourself when the ground shifts. It is not the first time. The earth moves here. It has always moved here. Since the great earthquake 17 years ago, people have grown accustomed to the small shudders that pass through the stones beneath your feet without warning, usually amounting to nothing, usually forgotten within the hour. This one starts the same way. A brief trembling in the stones of the counter, a faint shimmy in the liquid in the vessels, the slight uncertain feeling of the ground not quite behaving as ground should. You wait for it to stop. It does not stop. Instead, it builds. Slow at first, then unmistakably stronger. You hear the ceramic vessels on your counter begin to rattle against one another. The wooden shutters tremble in their frames. From somewhere down the street comes the crash of something falling. A roof tile, a storage jar. And then you look north, toward the mountain, because something in the quality of the light has changed. What you see does not have a name in your language. You have no word for it, no frame of reference for the shape that is rising from the summit or expanding upward and outward with a speed that seems impossible for something so massive. It is a column. It rises from the peak like smoke from a fire, but no fire has ever produced smoke on this scale, as thick as a tower, as tall as the sky itself, its top spreading outward like the canopy of a great pine tree, flattening and expanding as it rises, reaching in all directions. The color of it is something between gray and black and a dark yellow, shifting as you watch, lit from within by flickers you cannot quite understand. The street around you has gone silent. Everyone is looking north. Every face is turned toward the mountain, and every face holds the same expression, which is the expression of a person encountering something their mind does not yet know how to process, on a thing so far outside the boundaries of experience that the usual machinery of thought simply stops and waits. Then the sound reaches you, a rolling, deep percussion that you feel in the cavity of your chest before you properly hear it with your ears. Not like thunder, though that is the closest comparison you will reach for later. Deeper than thunder, more sustained, as if the sky itself has been struck like a bell and is still vibrating. Several people around you begin to move at once, pulling children toward them, stepping backward, scanning the street for something to orient against. Some familiar object that confirms the ordinary world is still present. The column keeps growing. It is still growing as you watch, its edges roiling and churning, its base obscured now by something dense and dark that is beginning to creep down the slopes of the mountain. You cannot tell what that dark spreading thing is. You will not know for many hours, and by then it will not matter. Your neighbor from 2 doors down appears at your elbow. She is a woman of about 50, practical and steady, someone whose opinion you have trusted since you first moved to this street. She says one word: go. You do not ask her where. The instinct that rises in you when she says it does not need a destination. It simply needs to move. You reach behind your counter and take the leather purse that holds the morning's coins. You look once more at the mountain. The column is enormous now, a pillar reaching high enough that its top has begun to tilt and spread in the upper winds, changing shape even as you look at it. And the dark material at its base is moving faster than it was a minute ago. You cannot tell what it is. You turn from your counter and you walk, and then you are running. The street is filling with people now. Not the ordinary filling of a morning market, but a different kind of density, urgent and directional. People moving away from the mountain, away from the north, toward the city gates that lead south and east, toward the road that follows the coast, toward the open country beyond the walls. You are among them, and they are around you, and the sound of footsteps on basalt, and the sound of voices calling for each other, and the sound of that deep, sustained vibration from the mountain are all layered together into something you will never be able to describe accurately to anyone who was not there. And the first ash begins to fall before you reach the gate. It comes gently at first, fine gray particles drifting through the air like the soft end of a fire. settling on your arms and on the stones of the street, and on the shoulders of the people around you. It is not hot. It is not particularly alarming in itself. It is simply wrong, the way that fine gray snow in the middle of a warm summer day is simply wrong, in a way that lodges itself somewhere deep in the animal parts of the mind that deal with the knowledge that something is profoundly not right. Then comes the pumice. It begins falling with the ash, mixed into it. Small, pale stones the color of bone, light enough to bounce when they hit the ground, light enough that when they strike your arms and the back of your neck, they produce more surprise than pain. But the quantity of it increases quickly. Within minutes, the street is beginning to accumulate a thin layer of this material, pale and gritty, crunching underfoot. The sky above has changed color. The blue of the morning replaced by a deep gray-brown that is not cloud in any sense you recognize. It presses down from above like a ceiling descending. You reach the gate. Hundreds of people are passing through it, and more are coming from the side streets and from the buildings along the main road. You hear voices calling names. You hear weeping somewhere to your left. You hear a man shouting something that may be instructions or may simply be fear finding a shape. The pumice is falling steadily now, coating every surface, collecting in the folds of clothing, in hair, in the spaces between the paving stones. A people hold cloth over their faces. Some have tied items around their heads. A child pressed against a wall is crying with a particular steady intensity that suggests it has been crying for a while. You get through the gate and onto the road beyond the walls, and you keep moving. The world outside the city is strange in a way that the city somehow made less visible. There are no buildings to cut the sky, and the sky out here is extraordinary in its wrongness. The column from the mountain is now so large that it fills a significant portion of the sky above you, spreading and darkening, its internal convulsions visible even at this distance. To your east and west, other people are on the same road, some moving quickly, some stopped and looking back, some sitting at the roadside as if unable to decide. An old man sits on the low wall of a tomb along the street of tombs, his back to the city, his hands on his knees. He is not moving. He is simply waiting, and you do not know for what. The pumice continues to fall. The layer on the road is now thick enough that each step produces a small crunch, as if walking on very coarse sand. The light has grown strange and dim, neither the flat gray of an overcast day, nor any color of light you have experienced before. It is the color of something being filtered out, the warm frequencies of ordinary daylight removed, leaving behind a cold and shadowless illumination that makes everything look as though you are seeing it underwater. You stop at some point and look back. The city is still there. You can see the high line of the walls, the roof lines of the larger buildings, and the shape of the amphitheater at the southeastern edge. And beyond it, behind it, above it, the mountain. The column has changed shape since you first saw it. Its top has spread and thickened, and the entire formation is leaning now, tilting south and east in the upper winds, stretching toward you as if reaching. The dark base at the mountain's summit is more visible now, a dense rolling mass, and the rumbling that has continued since you first heard it has taken on a different quality, lower and more sustained. Something felt more than heard. Several people near you on the road are not looking at the mountain. They are looking at each other. The particular look of people trying to read from another person's face, whether it is safe to feel as frightened as they feel. There is no consensus forming, and the faces around you reflect the same information you have, which is to say, none. Not really. None of you know what this is. None of you have words for it. The earth moves beneath your feet again, a steady rolling that lasts for several seconds, and the wall you are standing beside sways slightly and settles. A section of plaster falls from it and shatters on the road. You turn back to the road, heading south. The motion of walking is its own comfort, the physical sensation of going somewhere even when you do not know what somewhere means in the context of everything that is happening. The ash and pumice are falling more heavily now. Visibility along the road has diminished. People ahead of you are shapes rather than individuals, gray-coated and indistinct in the falling material. The air tastes of something mineral and strange. But you pull the fabric of your tunic up over your mouth and nose and breathe through it. The afternoon advances. Or perhaps it is still morning. The light provides no guidance now, the sky above having arrived at a uniform dark gray that gives no indication of where the sun might be. You have been walking long enough that your legs carry the dull ache of sustained effort on an ordinary surface. But the road is not an ordinary surface. It is several inches deep in light pale debris, and each step sinks slightly before finding purchase. The sound of the pumice crunching under hundreds of feet is constant. Behind you, the city is no longer clearly visible. The falling material and the dark air have reduced it to a vague mass of darker shadow at the edge of the visible world. The mountain itself is barely distinguishable from the sky. Everything to the north is the same deep gray-brown, a uniformity that seems to be expanding, pressing south and east, following the crowd of refugees along the road. You have collected other people around you the way movement collects things. A family from a street you did not know well. The father carrying a young child on his back. A man you recognize as a regular at the baths, though his name escapes you, his face now dusted gray like everything else. A woman who introduced herself as coming from Herculaneum, the smaller city around the bay, and whose eyes contain something you do not look at for long, because whatever she saw in Herculaneum is not something you want to know about yet. She is moving quickly. She does not look back. By late afternoon, or what you estimate to be late afternoon, you have covered a significant distance from the city. The pumice fall is not heavier here, but it is steadier. The air thick with it. Every breath carrying fine particles that settle in the back of the throat and behind the eyes. People are stopping more frequently to rest. Some have made small camps at the roadside, wrapping cloth around themselves against the continuing fall, eating whatever food they carried, though the food too has a gray coating on it now, and the taste of ash is in everything. The ground shakes again, longer this time, more insistent. You hear, behind you and to the north, a sound that is unlike anything that came before it. Not the sustained rumble of the column, but something sharper and more immediate. On a deep cracking report, followed by something that might be described as a roar, except that the word seems inadequate. People around you stop walking and face north. The dark sky to the north seems, for a moment, to have brightened. A brief orange pulse visible through the heavy gray air. And then the sound of it reaches you. A sustained bass vibration that you feel in the soles of your feet and in the bones of your chest simultaneously. No one speaks for a moment. You have no way of knowing that what you just heard and felt was the eruption column beginning to collapse under its own weight. You have no way of knowing that on the far side of the mountain, what happened next erased an entire city in minutes. You do not know about pyroclastic surges, about the physics of superheated gas and ash moving at speeds no living thing could outrun. Or these are concepts that belong to a science that will not exist for 17 more centuries. What you know is what your body knows, which is that something irreversible just happened, and that the distance you have put between yourself and the city is the best decision you have made in your life. The night that follows is unlike any you have experienced. There is no night exactly. There is only a deepening of the darkness that has persisted since the morning, a thickening of the air, a continuation of the ash and the pumice, and the occasional shuddering of the ground. People huddle together for warmth and for the simple human necessity of proximity in the dark. No one sleeps for long. When the ground moves, everyone comes to alertness simultaneously. A collective bracing, a shared waiting for whatever comes next. And you think about your workshop, the counter, the vessels, the arrangement of the morning. You think about your sleeping space above, the high, narrow window, the particular quality of the light through it at dawn. You think about the street, the walls covered in painted words, the bakery smell, the sound of the millstones. You hold these things in your mind the way you would hold something precious in your hands, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who is beginning to understand that these things may not be available to hold much longer. You think about the mountain and how you never thought about it at all. When the first light of what should be morning arrives, it is a gray and sickly thing, barely distinguishable from the dark that preceded it. The air has settled somewhat. The pumice fall has slowed, although the ash continues, fine and relentless. The landscape around you is unrecognizable. The familiar olive groves, the vineyards that line every hillside in this part of Campania, the farmhouses and their gardens and their outbuildings, all of it is buried under a pale gray layer that smooths every surface and eliminates every shadow, and makes the world look as if someone has covered it carefully with a cloth. People begin to move again with the light. The immediate group around you discusses quietly what to do. The woman from Herculaneum does not discuss anything. She has already been moving for hours. The family you walked with yesterday is torn, the father wanting to go back, to see what remains, to understand the extent of what happened. His wife says nothing, but her silence carries its position clearly. They are not going back. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. You do not go back either. Not that day. Not for many days. When you do eventually return, along the road from the south, you will understand from a long distance, before you even reach the city's walls, that the Pompeii you are walking toward is not the Pompeii you left. The roof lines are wrong. The walls rise in places to heights they should not reach, and are absent in places where they should stand. The streets are filled to a depth you have to calculate with some discomfort, because the calculation reveals that things you should be able to see above the accumulated debris are not visible above it, which means they are under it, which means the depth is greater than you initially wanted to believe. You walk among other returnees, on other people picking their way back through the gray landscape toward the place that was their home. The sounds are wrong. The city was always full of sound. the grinding of mills, the shout of vendors, the creak and clop of cart traffic, the thousand-layered sounds of 40,000 people living in close proximity. Now there is wind. There is the soft sound of your own feet in the accumulated ash. There is, at intervals, the distant sound of teams of workers somewhere in the buried city, the muffled sound of tools against the compressed debris as the salvage teams brought in by the Emperor work to retrieve what can be retrieved. Some people you speak with on the road have already decided. They will not rebuild here. Their cousins are in Nola. Their family connections lead to Naples. Their trade networks extend to Rome. And they will start somewhere else. They will carry their skills and their contacts and the particular knowledge of how to make things and sell things that Pompeii gave them, and they will build new lives in different places. The city is gone. They are not. Others are less certain. They stand at the edge of the buried streets and look at the gray plain where their neighborhood used to be and perform the arithmetic of loss in their faces, working through what is gone and what is not, what might be recovered and what cannot. Some of them will stay. Some of them will root themselves into this ash-covered ground and refuse to leave the place where they were formed. They will dig down through the pumice to the floors of their old homes and make those buried spaces into cellars, building new rooms above on top of what was lost. They will carry the city forward in this strange altered form, living above their own buried past, knowing it is there beneath them, keeping it with them. This is what you do not know, lying there in the dark in whatever world you occupy tonight. You do not know how many of them stayed. You do not know that for years, for decades, for centuries, there were people on that ground. People baking bread in ovens built over the buried floors of their grandparents' homes. People who remembered, and then people who remembered that other people had remembered, and then people for whom it was legend, and then people for whom it was simply the ground they stood on without knowing what it had been. You do not know that the mountain would erupt again, centuries later, and this time the last few would finally leave. That the city would disappear not only from the physical landscape, but from the map of living memory. That forests would grow over it. That farmers would plant vineyards on the gentle rise of its buried buildings and call the area simply the city, and mean by that only a shape in the land, not a history. That monks in distant cold monasteries would copy and recopy the letters of a young man named Pliny, who had watched the smoke column from across the bay and written it all down, preserving the account of the catastrophe, while the place it described faded from anyone's ability to locate. You do not know that nearly 17 centuries after the day you walked out of your city, with the pumice falling on your shoulders, and the sky the wrong color, and the mountain doing something no living person had words for. Someone would be digging a channel for a river, and would hit a wall with painted frescoes on it, and would not know what it was, and would keep digging, and would bury it again. You do not know about the tunnels that came later, men lowering themselves by rope into the earth, and chipping through the hardened volcanic rock by torchlight in search of marble and bronze for kings who collected beautiful things. You do not know about the open sky excavations that followed, the first careful uncoverings, the day someone read the words the state of the Pompeians carved into stone, and understood for the first time in over 1,600 years what city this had been. you do not know about the plaster, and about the moment when an archaeologist named Fiorelli first understood that the hollow spaces he kept finding in the hardened ash were not structural accidents, but voids, shaped absences where people had been and then were not. That pouring liquid plaster into those voids would recover the shape of a body in its final moment. The posture of arms raised against what was coming. The angle of a head turned away. The particular curve of a person curled around something or someone they were trying to protect. The expression on a face in the last seconds of its last experience. All of it preserved in the ash that killed them. You do not know that people from all over the world will one day stand in those buried streets and look at those casts and feel something that has no clean name, something between grief and recognition and the particular vertigo of understanding that the distance between yourself and the person in the cast is measured in time and nothing else. That the person lying there in their final shape had a morning that started the way your mornings start. That they walked out of their sleeping space and heard the city coming to life around them, and thought, with whatever portion of the mind is dedicated to this kind of thinking, about what they needed to do that day. That they stood in a doorway, or at a counter, or in the street, and looked at something familiar without really seeing it. The way you look at familiar things without really seeing them, because familiar things do not demand attention. They simply exist. That the mountain was visible from where they stood, and they did not look at it because there was no reason to look at it, and they had looked at it their whole lives anyway, and it was just the mountain. And then it wasn't. The story of Pompeii is not the story of a city that was destroyed. It is the story of a city that was ordinary. 40,000 people who woke up on an ordinary morning in a place they knew completely, a place layered with their own history and their neighbors' histories, a place whose streets were worn smooth by their own feet and their parents' feet, and the feet of people before them going back centuries. A place where the same arguments happened over the same walls, and the same bread was ground in the same mills, and the same mountain stood against the same sky every morning when they opened their eyes, with the volcanic ash preserved it. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary. Because it was full of the specific and unremarkable details of real lives. The half-eaten loaf of bread in the bakery, the dice left on a table, the graffiti scratched into plaster by someone who felt strongly about the wine in a particular tavern and wanted everyone to know it. The amphorae stacked in a warehouse waiting to be loaded. The garden behind a wealthy house where someone had been training a vine along a wall with such careful patience that the vine still shows the wire it was trained on, fossilized in its domestic aspiration. If you lie in the dark tonight and try to picture it, try not to picture the catastrophe. Or rather, picture it in the way that comes after you have first pictured the ordinary morning, on the bread smell from the bakery, the sound of the millstone, the weight of summer heat beginning to build in the narrow canyon of the street, the walls covered in words, the mountain to the north, visible and unremarkable, and always there. The person who was you, 17 centuries before you were born, standing at a counter in the early morning light, listening to the city come to life, thinking about the day ahead, not knowing yet that today is the day by which every other day in this city's long history would eventually be measured. The column of smoke and ash and fire that began to rise from the mountain in the late morning would eventually be seen from across the whole bay. The commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, an extraordinary man who had spent his life cataloging the natural world and whose name was Pliny, you would watch the formation rise and tilt and spread and describe it as resembling a great Mediterranean pine tree, trunk, and canopy. He would order a ship prepared, first out of scientific curiosity, and then out of a more urgent impulse when a message arrived from a woman trapped on the coast below the mountain asking for help. He would sail toward the disaster while others sailed away from it. He would spend his last night at the villa of a friend on the coast near Stabiae, watching the red and orange light playing across the bay from across the water, pretending to be calm, calling for water, lying down on a blanket outside because the ground inside the building was too dangerous to trust. When the surge came across the water in the early hours of the next morning and his companions ran, he could not run. His lungs had been compromised his whole life, and the thick air had already taken most of what they could give. He fell. He died on the shore of the bay he had loved. His nephew, 17 years old, watching from Misenum across the water, wrote 2 letters about what he witnessed 25 years later, when a historian asked him to set it down. Those letters are the only eyewitness account we have. They describe the cloud rising and the darkness and the ground shaking and the sea pulling back from the shore and a black wave of material coming across the water that swallowed the light entirely. They describe people in the streets of Misenum calling out to each other in complete darkness, unable to see the person standing beside them. They describe the belief, held by many in those hours, that no gods remained and that the world was ending. They describe how the darkness eventually lifted, how the ash-gray morning revealed the world still present, changed but present, how the people of Misenum walked home through the settling debris and resumed their lives. They do not describe Pompeii directly. The younger Pliny never went to the city after the eruption. What he saw from across the water. What he knew of the city's fate, he knew from others. But his account of the cloud, the darkness, the sound, and the behavior of the sea gives us the frame within which the city's last hours can be understood. The pumice fall that lasted through the day, the darkness that fell while the sun was still in the sky, the ground shaking, and the roofs giving way under the accumulated weight of debris. And then, even the small hours of the night, the surges, the rolling superheated clouds of gas and ash moving faster than the human body can move, arriving with almost no warning, carrying a heat that ended everything they touched in seconds. The city that existed in the morning did not exist by the following afternoon. But the people who had woken in that city and walked out of it during the long, terrible hours of the pumice fall were still alive. They were on roads leading south and east, and they were covered in gray, and they were frightened, and they did not know what had been lost until they turned back to look and could not find the city in the landscape, because the landscape no longer contained it in any recognizable form. They scattered into the world. How they took with them the knowledge of how to make wine and oil and garum and cloth and bronze and pottery. They took their languages and their habits and their particular way of building a counter and painting a wall and calling out to a neighbor in the morning. They went to Naples and to Rome and to smaller towns along the coast and inland. They carried Pompeii in them wherever they went. They carried the sound of the millstones and the smell of the bakery, and the feel of basalt, paving stones underfoot, and the view of the mountain from any street in the city, the mountain that was always there, always unremarkable, always just the mountain. They lived long lives, many of them. They had children and grandchildren and told stories around fires, the way people have always told stories around fires. And some of those stories were about a city that used to be there, on the coast of the bay, in the shadow of the mountain. Stories that described it with the specific love that people feel for the places where they were formed. The particular heat of the street in summer. The smell of the sea coming in off the bay in the evening, when the heat of the day released, and the temperature dropped, and the air moved inland and brought the salt and the faint smell of fish with it. The sound of the amphitheater on a games day. The green of the garden behind the atrium of a large house. The particular quality of the shade there in the afternoon. The sound of water in a basin. The wall at the end of your street where someone had painted your neighbor's name in endorsement of his candidacy for a local magistracy 2 elections ago, and no one had gotten around to painting over it. Stories that described these things with precision and warmth, and then stopped, because there is a point in every such story where the person telling it reaches the edge of what can be said and stands there at that edge for a moment before moving on. The city is still there if you want to go. You can walk the basalt streets and feel the ruts worn by the wheels of ancient carts under your feet. You can stand in the Forum and look at the Capitolium, roofless and open to the Campanian sky, and understand by its scale what the city thought of itself. And you can walk the street of tombs outside the walls and read the inscriptions of the people buried there. The carefully carved letters setting down what was to be remembered of a life. The achievements and the relationships and the simple fact of having existed. You can look at the plaster casts in the museum near the site and understand in your body, rather than just your mind, that these are people. Not artifacts, not illustrations, people. And the mountain is still there. It is always still there, visible from the streets of the modern city that has grown up around and over the buried ancient one. Visible from the excavated areas, from the museum, from the road that leads south along the coast. It stands against the sky, in exactly the way it stood against the sky on every morning of every person's life who ever lived in this place. For from the earliest Oscan farmers who built their 5 small villages on the hardened lava plateau, to the last survivors who climbed back into the buried upper floors of their old homes and made new lives above the ruin of their old ones. The mountain is monitored constantly now. Scientists track every tremor, every shift in the gases rising from the crater, every subtle change in the slope of its sides that might indicate the movement of material inside. They believe it is overdue. They believe that when it erupts again, the eruption will be significant. More than 3 million people live in its shadow now, in the density of towns and cities that have spread across the landscape of the bay. Their roots go deep into the volcanic soil that has been producing abundance in this region for longer than anyone can accurately measure. And they know the history. They know what happened. They stay because this is home, and because home is not a calculation. Home is something that runs deeper than probability, something that persists in the face of evidence the way the city itself persisted, in the people who carried it with them, in the stories told around fires, in the letters copied by monks who did not know the place they were preserving. in the buried streets waiting under the ash for someone to come and find them. Pompeii was not a tragedy that happened to a city. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary city that became something else entirely. The tragedy and the wonder and the reason it still matters are all in that gap, between the morning and what followed, between the familiar mountain and the column rising from its summit, between the person standing at the counter in the early light, listening to the city come to life, and the person who will stand on that same buried street 17 centuries later and feel, without being able to explain it exactly, that the distance between them is smaller than it should be. Let that thought carry you now. The city is quiet. The ash has settled. The mountain stands against the dark sky, and the stars have returned. The same stars that were there before, unchanged, indifferent to what happened beneath them and what did not. The streets of Pompeii lie under the dark, and the silence and the weight of what covered them. And in the silence, there is something that persists, something that was never destroyed because it cannot be destroyed, and being made not of stone or wood or paint, but of the simpler and more durable material of having lived, of having been present, of having stood in a doorway on an ordinary morning and listened to a city come to life. You are lying in the dark, listening to the sound of this voice, and beyond it, the sound of wherever you are, and beyond that, the sound of the night. Let everything soften now. The story has been told. The city will still be there tomorrow, half buried, half revealed, waiting for the next person who needs to remember that human lives have always been conducted in the shadow of something that could end them, and that this has never, not once across all of our history, been a reason to stop living them fully. Rest now. The mountain is quiet tonight. Good night.